Recently, a friend of mine tipped me off that her neighbor, a woodworker, was moving and getting rid of a bunch of wood. So I hustled over there and got a bunch of stuff for free. That gave me the spark to do a project I'd wanted to for a while, which was to clear off this shelf, take off the plywood, and turn this into more of a traditional lumber rack instead of a full shelf. So I got the plywood out of there, and with a little help from my daughter, I added a third holder to turn this into more of a traditional style lumber rack, and then loaded that up with pieces of wood from my friend's neighbor, which I really appreciated. The next thing that I wanted to do was to take that plywood and use it to add something to my assembly table that I built last summer. So what I did was to take off the simple shelf that I had added and was never really that useful and turn it into a tool cubby for a bunch of the tools that I've got. So here I'm kind of laying it out, and the first thing I wanted to do was to take that existing shelf and use my router to cut some dados so that I could add dividers. And this was my first time really using my router to cut dados, so there was a little bit of trial and error here, which you might see. The first thing that I learned was how important, of course, it is to make sure that the guide that I was using was really securely clamped. And I took a little experimenting to figure out what the best way was. I'm not sure that I did a great job on this shelf, which would eventually become the back plate for it. But after a little bit of trial and error and just experience, I came up with a system that I think worked pretty well. I took the small level and clamped it in the front, used a square to sort of even it up, and then used the long level clamped to the other end to hold the other end of the small level in place so that it wouldn't pivot on me. And you can kind of see that in place right here. Once I got that system set up, that actually worked out really well, and I was able to go pretty quickly. So what I'm doing is just routing out dados so that the dividers have a place to sit for both the bottom of the shelf as well as for the back of the shelf. So there was quite a bit of work in terms of cutting those dados, but once those were cut, it was basically ready to put into place. And here what I'm doing is cutting off some pieces of scrap that'll become the ends. So here I'm putting in the bottom shelf and the back of it as well. What I needed to do with those small pieces that I cut down was add those to the sides, and I added a little block that I cut out of a piece of 2x4 so that I'd have an easy place to secure those things. So you can see me adding one of those blocks here. Once those side pieces were in place, it was pretty much ready to go. I could get the dividers cut down, and for this I just took a piece of wainscoting that we had from a bathroom renovation project and got my crosscut sled out and cut those into the right sides. And one thing that really helped in doing this repeatably was a stop block, which you can see clamped to the crosscut sled there. So I got a bunch of dividers cut, and then it was just a matter of getting the shelf firmly attached in place, as well as the back part, and then sliding the dividers in. You can see me putting the tools into the cubbies here, and there it is. It was a quick project. That was really rewarding. I was able to take a weekend and start and finish this in one weekend, which is not always the case for my projects, so I'm really pleased with how this came out. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to my YouTube channel, or check me out on Instagram @BillVanLoo.